Okay, so in example 2, we're going to take a look at another example that causes a little bit of a difficult situation when trying to put a quadratic into vertex form. And that actually arises when your function in standard form has an odd b. So in other words, the middle term is an odd number. So say we had something like x squared plus 7x, I don't know, minus 10. And so clearly that's not a perfect square trinomial because of this negative 10 is not a perfect square. And so as usual, we'll kind of take that negative 10 and just deal with it later. We just kind of slide it down and just focus on the parts that have the x's, the x squared and the x term. And then what we try to do is we figure out what is it that we could add, and this turns out to start, nice with an x squared, so makes it pretty easy to complete the square if it weren't for the fact that the middle term is odd. So normally we take the b and we divide it by 2 and we square it, and that's what we still have to do here. It's just that when you take 7 and divide by 2, you get 7/2 or 3.5. And so then squaring that's what we would have to add as our constant term to create a perfect square trinomial. Well, 3.5 squared, or 7/2 squared, turns out to be 12.25, or if you wanted to write it as a fraction, would be 49/4. So either 49/4 is what I'm going to add, but that's equivalent to 12.25. So that's actually what we're adding as a fraction, or you can write it as a decimal. Well, that means that on the other side, I have to add that exact same thing. So this is where maybe having it be a decimal might make it easier. So say I'm adding 12.25 to that side, just like I added 12.25 to that side. But now I've got this perfect square trinomial that I created. And when I factor it, I take the square root of the x squared, which is an x, and I take the square root of 12.25, which turns out to be half of 7. So the other way you could look at it is just taking half the middle term to get that the second term in your binomial. But the square root of 12.25 is 3.5, or 7/2. The middle term, remember, dictates the sign on the binomial, so it's going to be a plus. So now we've got this written as a square binomial, and all we have to do now is clean up the rest. So we want to get rid of this 12.25 over on this side, so it just says f of x, so we subtract it, and I'm going to subtract it over here as well. And I just made up this problem, so it's not very good. But it turns out that that constant term now at the end here is negative 22.25. So it is in vertex form. It's not pretty for sure, and the vertex is gonna, whether you want to do it in decimals or fractions, I have it in decimals, so the vertex then would be at negative 3.5 and negative 22.25. So again, the process is still the same. It's just that the numbers you're going to be adding are not going to be integers, so it just makes it a little trickier. But